Reading for this morning is a little essay that appeared in an online publication called The American Scholar, which was posted on Facebook by my first wife a couple of days ago, called Home for Thanksgiving by William Zinsser. I've been trying to imagine Norman Rockwell trying to paint the modern American family gathered around the Thanksgiving dinner table. For more than 4 decades, Rockwell was the custodian of our domestic mythology, mainly with his cover illustrations for the Saturday Evening Post. Those covers fixed in our collective memory the sacramental moments of small-town life: Bobby's first haircut, Barb's first prom, and the supporting cast of butchers, bakers, teachers, preachers, judges, cops, and other kindly bulwarks of stability and order. Rockwell's American family was a tidy unit that came in a standard package: Granny and Gramps, Mom and Dad, children and grandchildren, uncle and aunt, and a dog that looked like a dog. Children often had freckles. Whatever became of freckles? Everybody was happy. No issues. Today, no magazine cover would be wide enough for Rockwell. He would need a Chinese scroll to accommodate the motley crowd assembled to eat turkey or some dietetically certified substitute. Single moms, single dads, partners, companions, half-brothers, half-sisters, stepchildren, ex-spouses, live-ins, live-outs, in-laws, outlaws, and dogs of rarefied lineage. Only an artist from a post-Rockwell school of painting, perhaps an abstract expressionist, could hope to catch the overlapping fluidities of the modern American tribe. My candidate would be a painter from an even more recent generation, the 79-year-old pioneer of conceptualism, John Baldessari, whose hugely influential body of work is available for deconstruction in a retrospective that has just opened at the Metropolitan Museum of Art. Reviewing that show for New York Magazine, the critic Jerry Saltz noted that Baldessari's art usually incorporates a photo or a grid of grainy black and white pictures. But after 1980, he writes, when Baldessari went from small and uncertain to big, clunky, and fragmented, the results got formulaic and optically awkward, involving dots of color over faces, cutout shapes, and irregularly hung framed pictures. Many of those words could describe the modern extended family: big, clunky, fragmented, optically awkward, irregular. But somehow it works. For me, the idea of Thanksgiving was not instilled by an artist. That happened on a plane ride over Iowa many Novembers ago. My wife and I were flying to Cedar Rapids to spend the holiday with her parents. At that time, propeller planes flew low over the American landscape, and around midday, I began to notice a recurring pattern on the snow-coated landscape below. Cars and pickup trucks, presumably loaded with husbands and wives and kids, kept turning off the arrow-straight county roads and into the yard of an ancestral farmhouse, the one that had a barn. America was coming home. The families coming home for Thanksgiving this year will be differently configured, more Baldessari than Rockwell. But nothing ever changes the event itself. Thanks are given for the bounty of the earth. Blessings are asked for the nation and its freedoms. The baby born since the last Thanksgiving is shown off and declared to be the most beautiful baby ever. A meal is shared. A family's fabric stitched back together for a few hours. Then suddenly across America, an invisible switch is thrown. Terminating words are spoken. Get your coat. When's the next train? And the best of holidays is over for another year. Home for the holidays. This week, For Thanksgiving, the New York Times devoted its science section to the changing American family. In short, it has ceased to conform to the Norman Rockwell image, if it ever did. I see features of these changes in this congregation and in my own life. Many of us are in our second or third marriages with separate sets of offspring. We or our offspring may have same-sex or opposite-sex partners. Some of the children or grandchildren may be adopted or of different ethnicities. And the places we call home are often far distant from each other. Today I want to talk about home and tell you about two films I've seen recently that have sparked my thinking about it. The place Jacqueline and I have called home these last 5 years is on Sears Point, southeast section of Chatham, just over there. It's not the house I still own in Lexington, but one we've rented from Hoyt and Debbie Eckert since we got here. Each morning on getting up, we see Stage Harbor, Morris Island, South Beach, and the Atlantic from our bedroom window. When we want to go into town, we have a choice: the direct route on Cedar Street or the scenic one on Champlain. If we take the scenic one on Champlain, we will reach this aha moment. At one point you come around a curve and then the road drops and you get this panoramic view of Stage Harbor. Now just at the bottom of that descent, the road curves to the left to proceed on to the harbor master's office, and there's a modest cape just on your left. That house is called Starboard Light, and it was the subject of a film which recently had a preview at the Orpheum Theater. It had been owned by the Fitzhugh family from the 1920s until 2010, when the generation which currently owned it, Generation 3, decided to sell. The film is about that decision and what it meant to the family. It was made by Nick Fitzhugh, a member of Generation 4, who's in his 20s, and the filmmaker was there for the showing. Chatham people turned out in droves to see this because, one, it was local. You always like to see your local town on the big screen. Two, it gives us a historical view of a beautiful, distinguished waterfront property amid all the big mansions. This is a very modest old house. But most of all, because a lot of us can relate to the anguish of the decision the present owners had to make in selling the family house. So the film Starboard Light poses a question. Does a family make a house, or does a house make a family? The house was built in the 1860s, and it was acquired by the filmmaker's great-grandfather in 1925. Family movies are spliced into the film along with contemporary views of the house. But these old family movies from the 30s, 40s, and 50s show a place where 5 generations grew up, learned to sail and swim, combed the beach, built bonfires, and spent many summer evenings just being with each other. What struck me about this film was that this family looked at this summer house in Chatham as a home, as its home, even though none of them ever lived there year-round. Most of them lived in Maryland or Vermont or Brooklyn. From all I could tell, it is unlikely that any Fitzhugh ever had enough residency in Chatham in almost 90 years of family ownership of Starboard Light to be qualified to vote in a town election. It made me think anew about this little 4-letter word that packs such an emotional punch: home. Where is home? What is home? The question is asked more acutely at Thanksgiving and to a lesser extent at Christmas. For it is then that the realities of our home life are measured against the ideal images we are given by our culture or traditions. I was fortunate, truly blessed this Thanksgiving to be able to gather my New York daughter and my wife's family from Arlington for a traditional Thanksgiving at our house at Sears Point. I know some of you were not able to get together with relations. Some gathered neighbors or friends. And undoubtedly some of you simply ate Chinese takeout and watched television by yourself. Many of you have had places you called home which are now many miles away from here. Many have family members which live in different states or different time zones or across oceans. If you or they opted to travel this weekend to be with family for Thanksgiving, you face the fact that half the nation was also trying to get home at the same time. My family and I didn't make the turkey trot because we didn't get to bed until 2 a.m. Thursday due to travel delays. But there is this ideal home. My concept of the ideal home is kind of muddled in my mind. Norman Rockwell is probably the dominant image, but being a Southerner, it is also overlaid with Southern plantations from Gone with the Wind. I left the South 18 years ago, and I never lived on a plantation, though I had ancestors who did. But a dream image, those plantations in my mind suddenly get a lot more problematic this weekend when I saw the second film I want to talk about. I saw 12 Years a Slave. It was probably difficult for anybody to watch, black or white, northern or southern, but it was particularly difficult for me to watch. It very skillfully painted a picture of unrelenting brutality of the institution of slavery. The contrast between the beauty of the southern landscape and the unspeakable cruelties of the treatment of the slaves was really heartrending. I have no doubt that those atrocities happened, and they happened over and over again. In fact, what was interesting to me about that film was it takes this character from Saratoga, New York, who gets kidnapped in Washington and sold into slavery. And through the lens of this guy that you can't sort of identify with, you see the vast suffering of all these people you probably can't identify with very well. It takes you into their world. And of course, they got left behind when he finally regained his freedom and left them on the plantation. It makes me think about where I came from. I'm a 14th generation South Carolinian, and I am descended from a plantation owner whose estate inventory at his death in 1851 lists 15 plantations and 1,648 slaves. I have much history to live down. By the time I was born, almost a century later, slavery was gone, but there was still a tradition of white households being maintained by black labor, and my family was no exception. As depicted in Gone with the Wind and the stories of William Faulkner, Tennessee Williams, and Thomas Wolfe, and Eudora Welty, Southerners have a strong sense of place. Stereotypically, you were supposed to have an old home place. Starboard Light, the film, showed to me this is not restricted to Southerners. New Englanders have it too, and can have it even about a vacation house. Robert Frost is sort of the quintessential New Englander, and he produced an enduring definition of home in a poem called Death of the Hired Man. A farmer and his wife are talking because the hired man that they have hired over the years and been very unreliable suddenly come back to them, come back to die, even though he has a brother a few miles away who's a successful banker. Anyhow, the definition they come up with is, home is the place where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. Home is the place where, when you have to go there, they have to take you in. It's a functional definition. It's not dependent on any place, and it's not dependent on any relationships by blood or marriage. The old song goes, there are places I remember all my life, though some have changed. The concept of the old home place has intimate connections with my earlier life. We have old home movies in my family too, and they are usually centered on my grandmother's fine Edwardian era home in an old inner suburb of Columbia, South Carolina, in which my mother grew up. The movie camera usually came out at Christmas and Easter. And one time when an uncle was about to go fight in World War II. At other times, the films were in summer when we went to the beach, usually at Pawleys Island or Edisto, often renting houses from our relatives. And it makes me, those beach scenes make me understand people's strong emotional associations with Cape Cod that would lead them to come back here to retire after careers in other places. These vacation houses, these beach houses, were associated with family, but they wouldn't have qualified as the old home place in my notions. We lost my grandmother's house when she went into a nursing home in 1978, and that was about the time that my parents downsized by selling the suburban house I had grown up in. That home was the first to go out of the family. 3 more followed in the decades after, each associated in my mind with strong personal traumas: the death of my father, my father-in-law, and my own divorce. It's interesting to see this loss of a home through the medium of film. Film creates its own new reality when it's viewed. Viewing the film is not quite the same as the experience of being there, but so many of our images of home come from movies. 12 Years a Slave as a movie is a great antidote to Gone with the Wind. The movie definitely took the romantic moonlight and magnolias covering off of antebellum Southern life. I grieve the loss of homes that I've had, and I feel a gravitational tug toward the past lives that I've had there. But I also see my life story as one of leaving home, not once but several times. That's another feature of homes. We leave them, sometimes temporarily, often for good. But we have strong feelings about home and family, and not all of them are positive. My first wife and I did not return to our hometown of Columbia after law school in 1975, but settled in Charleston 100 miles away, partly to be away from our families and my very conservative family law firm. We did not continue in the Episcopal Church of our ancestors in our own childhoods, but found a new faith in Unitarian Universalism. And then I left Charleston in 1995 to pursue my ministry studies at the same time my daughter was leaving to attend prep school in central Massachusetts. Within 3 years, all 4 members of my nuclear family were outside of South Carolina. In 18 years, I've only been back on short visits. Each of the 4 of us has had to develop new concepts of home. And I lived in various places around Boston until I made the first place I considered my home with Jacqueline in an apartment in Arlington in 1998. And we have lived together ever since. The places matter less than the people. Her family has taken me in, and I spend many of my holidays with them or they with us, as they did in the weekend just past. In the 5 years we've been here, Jacqueline and I have come to relate to Cape Cod as our home, though she has to travel a good deal for her musical career. And I have developed a bicameral brain. One lobe is southern and one northern. My stomach is still southern. I subsist for weeks on collard greens and barbecued pork. When I went to my son's wedding in England, I brought a Carolina specialty, boiled peanuts. They were very much appreciated by the South Carolinians there, and even the British guests were amused. Home, here in Chatham, is the liminal zone, a place of boundaries, the place where the land and the sea and the sky come together. The immense ocean at our doorsill reminds us of the possibility of other times and other places. The point I'm trying to make is that home is sometimes what we choose, and sometimes what chooses us, and sometimes what is dictated by the circumstances. For many of us, the holidays are reminders of people who are no longer with us, and places we no longer dwell in. They hold up a mirror of our losses. You have a place you call home, and yet you leave it. You may leave it for good reason. it has become stifling or dysfunctional. Or you want to grow in new directions, which are not possible under that roof. Yet ever after you put it in the rearview mirror, it will call to you. If you try to go back, it will sometimes turn out badly. And yet you have this gravitational tug. You can't go home, and yet you must. The Starboard Light film brought home how much all of this angst about home is seen through a lens of memory and expectation. In Buddhist terms, we cling to that which is impermanent, and we expect it to be permanent. And in that clinging is the root of unhappiness. The Cape Cod Times on Friday carried a story about a new holiday called Friendsgiving. To avoid the stress of dealing with family and the travel stress and all its ancient issues, just gather your friends for Thanksgiving. And whoever shows up, and with whatever food, makes a new tradition. Sure, mac and cheese for Thanksgiving, why not? This being the Christmas season, it's not amiss to consider the story of Jesus. The nativity story recounted in the Gospel of Luke says that Jesus' hometown was Nazareth, but Joseph had to go to Bethlehem to be registered with the government because that's where Joseph was from. A decree had gone out from Caesar Augustus that everyone had to go to their home to be registered. Can you imagine the red tape that would entail? Suppose the government issued a decree today that each of us had to go to the place where we were born in order to fill out some forms. What chaos would ensue? But as the story unfolds, of course, we know that the Holy Family doesn't actually get home to Bethlehem, but are homeless there. For there is no room in the inn, which is why the child is born in a stable. One wonders, where were Joseph's relatives? Going home for that family meant giving birth in a barn. And it's a paradox that so many people feel compelled to travel to this place of their origins on Christmas when the holiday is about homelessness on a basic level. Jesus is born in homelessness, and in a way stays homeless for his whole story. He even says, foxes have holes, and birds of the air have nests, but the Son of Man has nowhere to lay his head. And Jesus, of course, is not the only religious figure who leaves home. Prince Siddhartha had to leave his family palace at the start of the quest which will lead to his enlightenment. Muhammad must leave Mecca. Abram must leave Ur. Jonah must go to Nineveh. The shaman must travel to the other world. Ulysses must go to Troy. Dorothy must go to Oz. The quest of the Spirit, the pursuit of the holy, or just a personal growth often leads away from the bosom of the family that birthed us. It often leads away from the religion of our childhood. In one sense, home is where you get fed. The getting of food must be a principal occupation of any human being and of any human society from time immemorial. Anthropologists distinguish different levels of organizations of human society based on how they get their food. There's hunter-gatherers at the most basic level, and there's herders or pastoralists, and then there's agriculturalists. At some point later on down, people develop the way to grow crops. It's only with the development of agriculture that human life gets tied to a particular plot of land. Pastoralists, on the other hand, are often nomads. Consider the first murder in the Bible. Cain kills Abel, two children of Adam, the first humans. The second generation, this murder of one child, one son by another. Why? A lot of people say it's because this tension symbolizes the tension between the pastoralist and the agriculturalist. Cain is the pastoralist, and Abel, no, sorry, Cain is the agriculturalist, Abel is the pastoralist. Abel both prepare a sacrifice for God, but Abel's meat sacrifice is more pleasing to God than Cain's cereal sacrifice. It smells better. So Cain gets jealous and kills Abel over the question of agriculture versus herding. It persists on down to the musical Oklahoma. Remember, the farmer and the cowhand should be friends. Today, home is where we go when we have to eat. Many of us moved from the place we were born in order to pursue careers. Keep that food on the table. We follow our bliss or we follow the money. So the Thanksgiving meal has come to symbolize home. This is the place where you can come to get fed, to put on your feed bag, and we do. Some ministers will use the metaphor of home to describe a church. This is your home. This is your spiritual home. And I think it's great to think of that sometimes as spiritual home, but I don't try to overdo it. I try not to overdo it. I really try to avoid this because the concept of home, for most of us, is so bound up with things we have negative emotions about that we need to get away from. Church is always something we choose. Nobody made you get up this morning to come in here. You're here because you wanted to come here. And that's different from home, which is often something that chooses us. At its best, Unitarian Universalism offers a place of retreat where each of us can try to understand the religions of our childhood and decide which parts are worth keeping and which parts need to be discarded. For the end, it is the journey which is our true home. Heraclitus said you never step in the same river twice, but a Buddhist knows that it's not even the same you stepping in the second time. Our concept of home evolves with the choices we make and the circumstances life gives us. We live in a highly mobile society, and we're somewhat like hermit crabs, moving from one shell to the next as we outgrow each one. Home must also take account of how we age. Some of this congregation have been forced to move elsewhere as they cease to be able to live independently and have had to rely on children who live in distant cities. This is, of course, confusing because we may feel much more at home among our peers on Cape Cod than new people in a distant city. We get back to that third film, The Wizard of Oz. It's kind of an archetypal journey towards home. The plot line of the film is that Dorothy is trying to get back to Kansas, even though she is having all kinds of adventures on Oz that she could never have had in Kansas. At the end, she learns that she has had the power to go back all along by clicking her heels together 3 times and saying, "There's no place like home." What I'm trying to say this morning is this phrase is true in a literal sense. The home that we carry in our minds and the home we may weep about to the movies and which filmmakers will try to construct for us in the movies exists in our minds, but there's no place like it in the real world. There never was. Our memories play tricks on us. We remember the salted pecans and the roast beef, but forget the tedious political discussion among the uncles and the little digs that the cousins took at each other. The memory of home doesn't really correspond to anything out there. No real place can ever measure up to our expectations and what we think we remember. At the screening of Starboard Light, I asked the filmmaker, Nick Fitzhugh, if he'd come up with an answer to the question, does the house make a family or does the family make a house? His answer was both. Home at the holidays exists, if at all, for a few brief hours. After the last pie is eaten and the last game watched, coats are collected and travel undertaken back to the rest of our lives. May we each find happiness in our present homes, wherever we have made them. And may we always remember and reach out to comfort those who have no homes to go to. Amen.